So, what is it that really shapes a student's future? I mean, what actually determines whether a teenager decides to stay in school or head down a totally different path? Is it about their family, their grades, maybe how much money they have? Well, today we're going to dig into a study that tried to find the real clues. It's kind of like we're opening up a case file. You gotta wonder, is there some kind of secret ingredient, just one single thing that unlocks a student's academic future? It's a question that keeps parents, teachers, and honestly, probably students themselves up at night. But luckily for us, one group of researchers decided they were going to track down the answer. All right, so let's get right into it. The whole investigation we're looking at today revolves around this one really detailed study. And its goal was simple: to pinpoint the exact clues that can predict which path a student will take. We're going to follow the evidence right alongside them. And the first piece of evidence here is just the sheer scale of this thing. We're not talking about a handful of students. No. The researchers surveyed over 2,000 of them. That is a massive pool of data to work with. So who were these 2,000 students? Well, they were all ninth graders in a Russian region called Yaroslavl. This was back in 2010. And you have to remember, at that age, around 15 years old, they're standing at a huge crossroads in their education, a real turning point. So what exactly was the big question here? The researchers called it the educational trajectory. And really, it boils down to a pretty simple choice. Do you stay on the academic track, aiming for university? Or do you leave for a vocational school, or maybe just head straight into the workforce? That was the crucial decision they were trying to predict. Okay, so like in any good investigation, before you can find the culprit, you have to line up all the usual suspects, right? And that's exactly what the researchers did. They gathered a ton of data on all the different factors we typically assume are super important. First up, they looked at the family, and they asked all the questions you'd expect, right? Things like, how much education did the mom and dad have? What was the family's income? How many books were in the house? Which is, a classic way to measure the cultural environment. They even checked if living with both parents made a difference. Then, of course, they looked at the students themselves. They started with the obvious stuff, like academic grades. But they also dug into more personal things. For instance, did the students think of themselves as hardworking? Did gender play a role? What about their health? Or even what kind of school they went to, like a specialized math or language school? So there you have it. Our lineup of suspects is complete. The investigators crunched all the numbers, looking for the clues that actually had real predictive power. So, which of these clues really solved the case? Well, the results might just surprise you. After sifting through all of that data, all of the noise just kind of faded away. And it turned out only 3 factors really stood out. 3 key predictors that could tell you where a student was headed. Okay, predictor number 1, and this was the big one, by far. It was simply the student's own academic performance. Yeah, their grades. How well a student was doing in school turned out to be the absolute best indicator of whether they were gonna stay in school. It sounds obvious, right? But its power just blew a lot of the other factors out of the water. All right, predictor number 2. This one did come from the family, but with a bit of a twist. Remember how they looked at both parents' education levels? Well, it turns out it was the father's level of education that was the statistically significant one. A more educated dad was a strong sign that a student would stick with their academic studies. And that brings us to the third and final key predictor. And this one had nothing to do with family, and it wasn't directly about the student's own grades. It was about their friends. Yep, a student's choice was hugely influenced by what their friends were planning to do. The ambitions of their peer group, well, it turns out that matters a lot. This table right here just lays it all out perfectly. Just look at what didn't matter. All these things we often think are the whole story, family income, the mom's education level, even the number of books in the house, they just weren't statistically significant here. The real clues, the things that actually predicted the outcome, were crystal clear. The students' own grades, their dad's education, and the plans of their friends. But, how can we be so sure about this? Well, the researchers were really thorough. They actually used 2 different high-powered statistical tools to double-check their findings. Think of it like a detective using 2 totally different methods to confirm a theory. One method, logistic regression, calculates the probability a student will continue. The other, discriminant analysis, finds the best way to sort students into 2 piles, the continuing pile and the leaving pile. And guess what? Both methods pointed to the exact same 3 factors. And how well did their model work? It was accurate about 75% of the time. Let that sink in. Just by looking at those three things, grades, dad's education, and friends' plans, they could correctly predict the path for 3 out of every 4 students. That's incredibly powerful. This was definitely not just a coincidence. Okay, so we've cracked the case. We've found the key predictors. But what does it all mean? What's the big takeaway here? Why does any of this actually matter out in the real world? And this, right here, is the crucial point. This isn't just some interesting academic exercise. When you know these 3 key clues, a student's grades, their father's education, and what their friends are up to, you can spot the early warning signs. It means educators and counselors can identify students who might be at risk of falling off that academic track, and they can step in early to offer the right support and guidance. And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. Look, grades matter and family has a huge impact for sure. But what this study really shines a bright light on is the incredible power of our social circles. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How much of your own path in life was shaped by the people you chose to be around? How much did the ambitions of your friends end up influencing your own?